Stephen's Parish because the resident justice just happened to be the catechist and the one who gave the land for St. Bahamas. Sweetings Key becomes a station, and later St. Michael and All Age Church replaces that station. Now, the Anglican and the Baptists have a rivalry kind of going in around Bahama at this time. Basically, the Anglicans have not only the churches, but the schools and access to education. The Baptists, they have their own preachers, so to speak, because there was only one missionary sent out, and he had to quickly get a lot of local support going in order to keep all of these churches going. So back then it was, well, education versus local talent. And basically when people had children and wanted them to go to school, the government only had one school in Grand Bahama. And Grand Bahama is 96 miles long, with settlements scattered all about. So people have the choice. You can become Anglican and get free education, or you can remain Baptist. And so how did the Baptists counter this? If you went to the Anglicans, they basically pitch you out of the church. So in between 1931 and 1933, I know those two bookends, but I don't know exactly when. St. Nicholas, which is in High Rock, replaces Golden Grove. Basically, there was a big tidal wave. So the one that happened 5 years ago wasn't the first. And it really did a number on the low settlements in the eastern end of Grand Bahama. As a matter of fact, as late as 1933, a lot of people don't know, there was a hurricane that killed 20 people in the east end of Grand Bahama. They were practically walking around naked. And Samila Butler's mother and some other ladies got together and sent some clothes down there. So, you know, the east really gets battered a lot. And the houses back then weren't as substantial as they are now. So basically, St. Barnabas kind of went under, and also the population kind of shifted more to High Rock than Golden Grove. And St. Nicholas came about. Christ the King is the second parish, so it takes 110 years before a second parish is established in Grand Bahama. And beyond that, we now have Good Shepherd and Ascension. Of course, with Christ the King now, it's no longer St. Stephen's Parish, it's the Northern Archdeaconry, which includes Abaco and Bimini. And we'll just go over some of the churches very quickly. In 1839, there was a lay reader and catechist, and it was visited once by a missionary named Sweeney. In 1842, missionary Rogers is sent to start the parish with no church, but 3 stations in Grand Bahama. They being in Golden Grove, where the catechist who gave the land was, even though the church took some time to be built, in 8 Mile Rock, and what they call Barnett's Point, or today known as Smith's Point. In 1848, missionary Chambers is responsible for it. He has residence in Eleuthera, so he's responsible for mainland Eleuthera, but in his spare time, he has to visit Grand Bahama, Berry Islands, and Andros. And it really became a little too much for him. And about 2 years after, he was posted at St. Anne's, which, by the way, was the headquarters for all the Anglican mission churches serving the African population in Nassau. So he had some experience already traveling the island, so going from there to Gambia to Adelaide was kind of a cinch for him at the time because it was all on one island. Now, we talk about William Brown. The church is held in his house in 8 Mile Rock. He is described by Chambers in his 1848 report as a black man who reads well, and I recommend that he be a catechist. So not only does he give up his home, but he has to be a catechist. And Brown says, well, we don't have money to pay him, right? Not Brown, Chambers. We don't have money to pay him right now, but when we do, we will. The man has given up his home. He has to take on the catechist role, and it's an unpaid job. In 1849, land was secured for the church by another black parishioner. His name was Lightfoot. And 2 years later, in 1851, the church was built. And it's on the same place where it stands, even though it was battered by the hurricane of 1899, that it was first erected at the highest spot in 8 Mile Rock on the shoreline. Now, in 1871, things change around a bit because Joseph Attlee becomes a catechist. Who is Joseph Attlee? Well, they were having problems with the school down there, and he was from Belize. He got sent down as a teacher, and he happened to be a very staunch Anglican. And he eventually becomes the assistant resident justice. But he has to wait a long time for that because Mr. Cooper in Golden Grove was posted in his position from 1869 until the 1890s. Well, in 1908, Joseph Attlee becomes the first resident justice among all the ones that they were trying to get rid of to successfully become a commissioner. When the commissionership starts nationwide in 1908. And right after it starts, I found something in the House of Assembly the other day. They're asking, well, who all 59 and above? And he happens to be 59 and above, and he's retired a year later. And he ends up in Baytown because he administers his wife's estate from Baytown. In 1915, the church rectory is completed. Then you say, well, we got the church in 1851. Where did the guy live if he was traveling? Well, he lived aboard the boat. And the folks in Bimini, which was a part of St. Stephen's, they erected a rectory first by their own means. So the one who erected the rectory first was the home island. Bimini was the home island for St. Stephen's. Once a priest was actually stationed there and not just an assistant to St. Agnes. And that happened up until 1915, which is when the rectory in St. Stephen's of Grand Bahama was finally built. Now, you're going to have a St. Stephen's in Bimini, you're going to have a St. Stephen's in Grand Bahama, and you have a St. Stephen's in the middle of Andros. All the places that had St. Stephen's, I think, other than the Berry Island, ended up with a St. Stephen's church. Now, there's a story, too, about Andros in that one of the first native priests in the Anglican Church started out as a catechist in Andros, and he really did a good job. So they were able to move on from just having a visit him. So I guess that also made it easier for Andros to keep off. And in 1927, the first resident priest, because once the rectory, that only allowed the guy to come off the boat and, sleep in a bed other than Mr. Attlee's whenever he was in town. And they would just visit still. But in 1927, Canon White became the first resident priest in Grand Bahama. Grand Bahama was described by both the Baptists and the Anglican as being one of the wildest places to have to deal with in the whole Bahamas.
That's why
Wild, I think, more in the nature of the island. And it was also rough sailing there because if you had the wrong wind, there were many reports where they got to West End, they got to 8 Mile Rock, they got to St. Jude, Smith Point, and then on the way to Golden Grove or High Rock, they had to abandon the trip and either go straight to Sweeten Key or go back to the Berry Islands and start coming back home. Or sometimes what happened was between the late 1800s and when Father White became the resident priest, Sweeten Key was so far off coming from Bimini that they actually put the Sweeten Key under Abaco for a while. St. Jude's in 1871, St. Jude's is dedicated. In 1884, the church is in bad condition within about a dozen years. And they're in the process of building a larger church. In 1961 and 2, St. Jude's church land is sold to the Port Authority. Nobody knows quite how that story goes because the priest at the time purposely didn't keep any records. But the people of Sweeting's village, which is where Smith's Point, what we call Smith's Point today, where the big fish fry is, they would not give up on having a local church. And basically, they refused to give their personal land, they didn't sell. You know, the guy was able to sell the church land, but they didn't sell their personal land along the shoreline. And they kept Paul church in the large hall, then a new wooden church was built. And finally, in 2004, they got a new concrete block structure church consecrated under Father Cartwright. So it took them from 1871 to 2004 to become their own parish. Now, here are the ACM of St. Nicholas Parish, and they're clearing out these remains of St. Bahamas. If you look closely, you can see a step right here that came into